In the fall of 2006, on a mid-November morning on a small family farm in Grant County, Wisconsin, a regular guy hunter named Johnny King was on post waiting for the start of a mid-morning family deer drive.
I no more than kind of sat down, getting my spot ready, kind of checking out the woods, and I looked to my right, and all of a sudden this guy came out. He was actually from the woods behind us into the woods we were driving. And I was already sitting down, and I had this old 30-30 Savage little bolt action. The gun's only about this big. That's what I hunt with. So I'm like, my first shot's got to be good, because he's just standing there looking at me. Pretty much all I can see is his chest. He's in like a little, it's not really in the woods. I mean, it's kind of a woods with a little bit of a clearing. So I shot, and then all of a sudden I could kind of see that it kind of reared back. So I knew that I hit him pretty good.
And with that, the biggest buck anyone in the King family had ever seen was on the ground. But the story of the Johnny King buck had really not even started. And it almost never did.
So after we shot the deer, took it back to the buildings. Got to understand, as far as my family goes, we didn't really know a whole lot about scoring or Boone and Crockett. Our scoring system is basically, wow, that's a really great one, or wow, that's really, really nice. I didn't even think it was worth even getting scored, so I wasn't even going to pursue it just because nobody in the family's ever done it, or I didn't really know who to reach out to. So I would say after a couple weeks about that, you know, my brother called me up and he goes, Johnny, he goes, I really think you need to take that deer and at least have somebody take a look at it. You know, because like I said, for us, I mean, it was the biggest deer that any of us have ever seen, not knowing what a scoring system was. So I kind of looked into it a little bit, and I got on the Boone and Crockett website, found the local guy, and that was up in Baraboo. His name was John Ramsey. So I gave him a call because you have to wait over 60 days for the 90-day drying period. So I did that. We set up a time. I went up and met with John Ramsey. It was just kind of like, he looked at it and, you know, kind of didn't really say a whole lot right away. Just kind of, you know, what would you call it? Just kind of talking back and forth, kind of a little bit about the story. And then he got into it, the scoring, and he kind of looked at me and he goes, Johnny, do you realize what you have here? And at the time I didn't. He goes, you possibly have the new world record. And at that point I'm like, you gotta be kidding, you know? It's a small town guy hunting with his family, you know, this stuff just doesn't happen.
Just another Wisconsin morning deer hunting with family had now potentially turned into a world record. Clearly a reason to celebrate. But this is where the story of the Johnny King buck takes an unusual and dramatic turn. There are several organizations that score trophy big game animals and keep lists of records, but the Boone and Crockett Club is widely recognized as the top authority. Whitetail deer are split into two categories, typical and non-typical, and they are scored differently. A typical whitetail buck has pretty much evenly distributed points on both sides, all coming off a single main beam, with few or no extra points called stickers or drop tines. A non-typical rack can have points coming from and going just about anywhere. At first glance, for the casual whitetail fan and for Wisconsin Boone and Crockett scorer John Ramsey, the Johnny King buck was a massive, typical 6x6. One with a score that would replace the famous Milo Hansen buck as the largest typical whitetail buck the world had ever seen. But when the score and the rack were submitted to the top officials at Boone and Crockett, everything changed.
We went up to the room. I met with Jack Renau, and he just basically told me, he says, well, we're going to take a look at it. You guys can just kind of leave the room and kind of go do what you want, and when we're ready, you know, to kind of let you know, we'll give you a call. So it felt like forever, but I guess it was probably about an hour. They called me and said, you know, why don't you come back in? We want you to, you know, tell you what, you know, we kind of came up with. And at that time, he said that he was questioning the G2, or where the G3 comes off of the G2. And he said that it basically shared a point, so it technically doesn't qualify as a point on its own, so there's deductions where it wouldn't be the World Class deer. And at that point I did bring up to him, because I was kind of talking to some people, you know, with how the figure eight system works. And I did say, you know, like if you take a straight edge and if you can see daylight, you know, it's considered a figure eight. So, and at that point he told me, if you have to look that hard, it's not a point. Well, I was kind of disappointed. You know, we kind of went all that way. So we decided, you know, we just got the deer, hopped back in the vehicle and headed back home.
For most average hunters, including Johnny King, that likely would have been the end of it. But enough folks had either seen or heard about the king buck that the story would not die, and many simply had to see it for themselves. One of them was longtime antler collector and trophy whitetail enthusiast Jay Fish.
I heard about the king buck online, looked at pictures, which drew us down to Madison, Wisconsin, because we heard Johnny King was going to be there with the deer. We went down to Madison, we had a little booth down there, you know, showing some of our antlers. And a gentleman walked up to me and said, "Hi, I'm Johnny King. I heard you guys wanted to talk to me." And I introduced myself and I said, "Whatever happened with your deer?" He said, he gave me the background of how he went to Pennsylvania, and he said they lowered the score. He said they really didn't give me a reason. I said, "Is your deer in the building?" He said, "Yeah, it's hanging upstairs on the wall where they hang the trophies that are brought into the Deer and Turkey Expo." So I went up there and looked at it and I said, "That's not right. What they did to that deer is not right." And he goes, "You think it's typical?" I said, "It's not a thing of think, it's a matter of know." I said, "I can tell from 5 feet away that that's a typical point."
So began the campaign to convince Boone and Crockett to score the king buck as a true 6x6 typical, not a 5x6 typical with an extra deductible point. And in the process, recognize the Johnny King buck as the new world record.
I started going to a few shows with Johnny, and people were looking at it, and we started building more of a little coalition just to show people that look what a great deer this is that is just being kind of hidden. And talked to Johnny about doing some other shows and talked to him about getting it. I've been in the industry for a while. Johnny, it was his first time ever having something scored or involved in anything like this. So we tried that for about a year and a half, and Johnny just could not. He works too hard, works too many hours, and Johnny is a quiet guy. And so I told him just jokingly, I said, someday I'll own that deer, just jokingly, you know. And one day he called me up, he said, "I think it's time to sell it, Jay." He said, "It's just hanging in my cabin. You've made arrangements for me to show it to different people, and I just can't keep them." And so we made arrangements, we agreed on a price, and I purchased it from Johnny.
I was a Boone and Crockett measurer for 25 years and devoted a big part of my life to the Boone and Crockett Club. I was fortunate enough to measure some of the biggest antlers in the world. A number of years ago, I went to one of the Iowa Deer Classics, and I met Jay Fish and I saw the Johnny King buck for the first time. And I had quite a bit of experience in measuring some of the biggest deer in the world. Back in '95, we had the biggest group of typical deer ever assembled at one time at a panel measuring session. And I measured mostly every one of them. I measured a lot of other world records, and so I had early on a reputation of being a decent measurer and knew some stuff, and so I was asked my opinion on the king buck, and I looked at it for a while, and without actually putting a tape measure to it, I came to the basic conclusion that it was a 6x6 typical. And at that point, you know, there was the whole talk, the background about it was 2 points were abnormal, and that was, I didn't see that at all. And so as time went on, I was a very strong advocate for the Johnny King buck to be measured as a typical 6x6. I'd like to try to explain a little bit about common base points. Occasionally people get confused with the term, thinking that when you mention common base, sometimes people think, well, that's an abnormal point. Well, it isn't. Common base points are basically fairly simple, and the rule has been changed several times by Boone and Crockett over the years, which has added some confusion. But basically a common base point is 2 points, like this second and third point, coming off the top of the main beam, but they share common material that fuse them together at the beginning. On this side, the The point is a lot bigger, and these points still have, these two, this one and this one, the second and the third point, still have common base material, bone material, that fuse them together. But they do come out of the top of the beam. So the third point does not come out of the base of this one. Same thing on this side. When you measure the point, you come down the outside curve, and then you come down the outside curve. This point never intersects the second point. And that was one of the original arguments that Boone and Crockett had, that they used the word, the third point, the G3, partially comes out of the G2. And I laughed at that because it's like saying you can partially be pregnant. It's not. The point either comes out of the G2 or it comes out of the base of the beam. You can't have it both ways. So it partially does not work.
So I did some more talking with Boone and Crockett. Finally, over 5-6 years of putting pressure on them, they invited it to panel, a special panel in Missoula, Montana. I showed up with the deer. They told me I had to have it there. They were going to panel score it on Saturday, September 10th, 2010, I believe. They said I had to have it there by that Friday, the 9th, or they weren't going to do it. So we drove all through the night to get there, put the deer in their hands. I gave them a score sheet with the numbers, and they said, "What's this?" I said, "That's the original score sheet after the drying period. This is the score that you should use to score the king buck, because to call a special mini panel, you have to have a score sheet with a score higher than the standing world record." And they refused to accept that. They said, "Who did this?" I said, "John Ramsey." "Well, who's he?" I said, "It's one of your scorers. He's the one who originally scored the king buck after the drying period. This should be the original score that goes with that deer." He said, "Never heard of the man, we ain't accepting it." And I said, "See, that's where the problem is. We drove all the way out here thinking we're finally gonna get a fair shake. You went against your rules by not even having a score sheet. You don't even know who John Ramsey is, your own scorer, and you won't even let me know what rules you're gonna follow." But I said, "We'll go through it. I'll sign the score sheet if you can prove it." He promised me that by the time they're done scoring it, when we go into the meeting room, they'll have all of that for me. We got done, they called us back. A couple hours later, we went in the room. Johnny King, myself, Tony Schunen, and Buck Buckner. And Buck said, "We scored it as a typical." And I remember Johnny looked at me and went, "Yes." But he said a 5x5 typical with 2 abnormal points. And he said, "We scored it at 179 and 6/8, but we'll go back to the 180 because of shrinkage." And I said, "What rules did you use for that deer?" He said, "Boone and Crockett rules." I said, "What rules in Boone and Crockett?" I said, "You said you'd have it for me." "Well, I couldn't find them. I can't find the writings." So again, I had the rule books with me. I said, "It's not in this book." And he said, "Yes, I remember that now. That book went to print. That rule was written, but we didn't have enough time to get it added in. It was already being printed." And so he started going on and lying. Sorry for using that strong language, but he wasn't being honest. And I looked at him, I just put my hand up. I said, "Let's just end it here, Buck." I said, "You're not being honest. You haven't told us the truth once." I said, "I don't want to sit here and listen to this. We're gonna go home." As soon as we walked out of that meeting room, I got cameras in my face, questions being asked. I'm like, "What is this?" Field and Stream and Outdoor Life were there, and then the hit pieces started. That I'm after it for the money. It was never about the money for me. What it was for me was, we have how many million hunters hit the woods every year? And all we're asking for is a fair shake. Follow your own rules. Scoring deer can be fun. It can be exciting. It can be, you know what I mean? It's just, it doesn't have to go down a road of politics. And Ron put it the best. It isn't a beauty contest. You add up this column, you add up that column, the numbers will tell you where the deer belongs. That's all I ever asked for from day one.
I did talk to Jack Renault, my friend from the past, who's the director of Big Game Records and ran the Boone and Crockett office in Missoula. And part of the phone conversation was, at the end, he asked me, he said, "Ron, is this the kind of deer do you want to have for your new world record?" And my basic response was, I can't determine what a deer looks like or what kind of deer it is. It's the bottom line on the score sheet that determines the score and if it's a world record or not. The next correspondence I got from Boone and Crockett was I was dismissed because I didn't follow the code of ethics or conduct that they adhered to. I was never given a specific reason. But anyways, I felt very strong about the king buck and still do. And as I want to reiterate, I had no intention of ever wanting to see Milo Hansen lose his #1 position as the world record holder, but I felt very strongly that Johnny King deer should have been recognized as the new world record.
We ended up going into litigation, and at the end of the day, my wife and I had a long conversation, and I said, she goes, you know it's never going to be a world record with you advocating for it. She goes, I can see the reading and the writing, because the story, they deflect everything on you. It's Jay Fish, the bad guy. The king buck gets put behind there in every conversation. It's all me, 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 you know. And I went, you're right. I'm not the guy to bring this over the finish line. If this is important enough to the hunting public, the 30 million hunters in this country, 40 million, whatever there is, they will get it to where that deer belongs by just saying, you know what, darn it, we appreciate the animal. It's not about me or Johnny King, it's the animal. And I still feel in my heart one day it will be where it belongs. I mean, it is in Buckmasters, it is in Northeast Big Buck Club, it is in Safari Club International. All of them use the same scoring system, they just apply it differently, but the rules are the same. The other three accepted it with open arms. Boone and Crockett didn't.
I'll go to my grave feeling that this is the legitimate world record. It's my world record. It may not have the BNC label on it, but I totally feel that this is the world record. I've gotten to know Johnny King for a number of years after that. One of the nicest guys in the world you would ever meet.
They tell me it's like winning the lottery, shooting a caliber of a deer like this. And why me? You know, I'm not the greatest hunter out there, don't have the greatest equipment, but just love hunting, getting together with family. And for me, I guess maybe I was chosen to represent this deer. You know, I'm not out there all for the glory. I just want the best thing for the deer. And really, truly believe in that.
It took a toll on me, it really did, you know. But would I do it again tomorrow? In a heartbeat. Do I want to? No, but I would. Like my saying is, honesty and the truth doesn't have an expiration date. What was right yesterday is right 10 years from now. And I'd do it again, you know, not happily at times, but you got to.
Those are some of my feelings of the Johnny King deer. Probably the greatest typical deer that ever lived up until now. There might have been some greater than this that no man has ever seen or touched or picked up or anything, but for what we have now, what we know about now, this is it.
It's been nearly 14 years since that fateful November morning in Grant County, Wisconsin. And the Boone and Crockett Club still stands by its ruling that the Johnny King buck is a 5x6 with an extra non-typical point and not the world record typical whitetail. But for Johnny, Jay, Ron, and many, many others, the king buck is the king. And they continue to hold out hope that someday this amazing animal will get its due.